In terms of building proposal outlines, the mantra that comes to mind to me is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And I think that really manifests itself quite a bit in terms of grant writing and proposals. And, as very basic, in terms of, preparing for a specific application, you want to get in and take a look at what that proposal entails and, building something around that. So Asia and I are going to talk a little bit about that process, some best practices, how we project manage around that, and hopefully, you'll find something that is right sized to your organization and something you can take home. So, Asia, what's your process looking like when you're like, approaching an application, building that outline?
Absolutely. I'm always starting with the capacity of the nonprofit. Those are one of the first questions that I ask. Who do we have that is rendering services? And that question is always super important for me because it always jumpstarts the conversation to get to the root of why they need the funding dollars in the first place.
Mhm.
Because in my approach, I don't like to start with the money, I like to end with the money because I like to start with impact because the currency of that supersedes the actual physical dollar as well, but it allows for those holes and those challenges to arise. And in that proposal outline, where I'm collecting requirements to be able to see exactly are we going to be able to get this done? Because if I'm writing the grant alone or if I'm writing it with a project team in general, it allows me to extract some of the expertise that they may have as well. And that outline provides for a strong timeline as well, because it's too many times that I've seen in this line of work, whether I'm on the grant writing team or I'm on the grant review panel for organizations out here, where you can tell the application was rushed.
Yeah.
And it may be because the capacity was low, especially in the grant application when they show who's the team. And when you see that it's less than 5 people, you can understand where it is. But unfortunately, funders, they don't see that as an excuse, right? Because they want to see you making strong impact with what you have and they want to build upon that. They don't want to jumpstart it for you. And so those are some of the things that I've interfaced with. What about you?
Absolutely. And I agree with your point where money follows mission. And I think starting with having a true understanding about the organization, what your strengths are, and how you approach this problem. And, I know we've talked about making sure you're aligned in your proposal with the funder priorities, but you want to have a strong sense of self and talk about how your program applies to those priorities as opposed to trying to do the inverse and just make it clear that you're trying to chase that dollar for your agency. So I think that's always really key, kind of having that internal brainstorming, really having that strong boilerplate language, having that strong, data collection to know what your service levels have been. And then how do you work that into different aspects of the application? So, a lot of applications will ask things as minute as like how your staff works together, how you develop staff, a little bit about the demographics of the clients that you serve. And I think those will come naturally if you have that strong brainstorming session to begin with. But I do think in terms of the process, breaking down each of those sections so you know exactly how you need to tailor this application goes a long way in terms of thinking through how you put it together and also working backwards from that deadline so you have everything done at the highest quality possible before submission.
Absolutely. That's a great point in terms of like working backwards from the deadline, because it's extremely important that you don't necessarily have to fill out the grant application in order of how it's being posed to you.
Hmm.
And during the crafting, process of that particular outline, that is the best time to also quantify it as well. And as we've talked a lot throughout this course about quantifying data versus, quantifiable or qualitative data, with your proposal outline, this is an opportunity for you to match a timeline to it. Break down those sections, and put how long is it going to take to finish this section. And when you see those numbers, it allows you to best prioritize which section should you work on, right? Who on the project team is going to be a little slow with providing you with information to pass along to a grant writer such as myself or Anthony, or if you're bringing folks in as a consultant and they need to be able to get information to keep that ball rolling to meet the grant application deadline, that proposal that you craft out, as detailed as it is, it does make a difference in terms of where the priority needs to be so that you have that contingency or cushion room to meet that deadline so your application doesn't get submitted and it looks rushed. It feels rushed. And it's not an over reliance on data as opposed to impact that you've made, and it's not heavy on the ask.
Yeah. And I think, having multiple eyes on the application is a great way to kind of alleviate that. Again, we've talked a number of times of this top to bottom engagement from within your agency and external to your agency. And I think, the more voices you capture in there, the more of that complete picture you're going to paint. So it's not just the grant writer who might be relying on those data points, but also the folks on the ground that are, telling you what they're seeing and why that's influencing the application and the ask that you're making.
Absolutely. And it, lastly, in closing, it's reminding me of also sometimes there are nonprofits that are working on grant applications at the time of them doing programs in and of itself. And they may want to hold off on using old data because they're currently about to get new data. And so that's why crafting the proposal outline is super important so that you can, again, match up the timeline, not to complete the grant, but also match up the timeline of your program. You may have to, if you know you're going to be preparing a grant for this particular season of the calendar, do you really want to run that program?
Yeah.
Because you may get tempted to use that new data just because you currently have a grant application right in front of you. And you don't want to feel overwhelmed, right? Because you also want to make sure that the community that you're serving is the priority first, as opposed to the internal staff member that's providing the services as it relates to grant writing and grant management. And so continue to reflect and consider on your typical process as you're creating these proposal outlines, because I think Anthony made a very excellent point in terms of the detailed component of it is what's truly the most important with the outline, because you may have a variety of eyes that doesn't have time for those brainstorming sessions I may have discussed. And so share your experiences with creating those proposal outlines by way of also utilizing our forum, because you may learn something from one another that you can approach either as an individual nonprofit or as a joint nonprofit, as we've talked throughout this course, as well as you don't have to be the only one going after a grant. And then lastly, reflecting on whether or not what has worked best, right? And if it did work or not in your organization, so that you can be best prepared for the next grant to follow.